The Pro Velo Super League is a new pathway up to the World Tour. For the winner of this series, for the under-23s for the men, it is a star-year stint with the Jaco Alula team. For the winner of the women's category, it is a 12-month contract the following year with the Live Alula Development Squad. It's a new pathway to the highest level in the sport. One Aussie who has been there, he's now retired, but he's been right the way towards the top. He's even finished on the podium at the Tour de France. He's won all the big one-week races. He's known as the King of Wollonga. I'm Matt Keenan, and in this episode, we're catching up with Richie Porte. Well, I classify you, Richie, as Australia's proudest Tasmanian. Welcome to the road to the World Tour.
Thanks for having me.
One of my favourite quotes from you, I've said this many, many times before, was after you won Paris-Nice for the first time and you were asked the question, what's it like to be the first Aussie to win Paris-Nice? And you said, I'm not the first Australian, I'm the first Tasmanian.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the thing. Being from Tasmania, it was sort of, I guess it's a big step to make it from Australia to Europe, but then probably even more so coming from Tasmania to via the mainland to Europe was, and it's just nice. People should be proud of where they're from, and I certainly am.
Yeah, there's no doubt you're flying the flag really bravely for Tasmania. I often got asked the question afterwards, is Tasmania like the Basque Country? No, it's not. They're just really strong characters. So today I want to pick your brain on your journey through to the World Tour, where you debuted with Saxo Bank, famous for your stint at Sky, then across at the Trek team. But going back as a kid, what sports did you play?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of grew up around the swimming pool. My dad was managing swimming pools at the time. So, I mean, that was a brilliant background to have, was, just hanging out in the pool and then swimming from such a young age. And, I think swimmers have probably got one of the best work ethics, and it sort of set me in a good, good stead. But the other one that I did was Aussie rules boundary umpiring, which, you don't get much thicker skin than running the boundary at a country footy match.
The feedback is pretty clear when you're running the boundary. I boundary umpire for my son's under 12s, and some of the things that you hear from the other side of the fence, Richie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's all part of the banter, isn't it? So long as it's in good. What's the word? I'm trying to say. Good spirit. Yeah. It's
How did the bike start for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the thing. So I was doing triathlon. I guess that for me, I could run decently, but never to the level that I needed to be. And I loved cycling. That was the one thing. I remember telling my coach at the time, who was a bit of a legend in the triathlon circles, his name was Mark Matthews. I said to him, I think I just want to do cycling. And I was worried about telling him that, but he said to me, he goes, I think that's a really good decision. And I guess then I was lucky that the first club race I did, there was a fella called Andrew Christie Johnson standing on the side of the road watching. And, anybody that doesn't know who Andrew is obviously not involved in Australian cycling, because he's just been, I guess there's Jerry Ryan, there's Michael Drapak, and there's Andrew Christie Johnson. Nobody's done more for the careers of Australians.
Well, let's touch on Andrew Christie Johnson, because his contribution to Australian cycling has been enormous. In the last 10 to 15 years, or even further back than that, he has, I don't know the exact stats, but probably sent as many Aussies to the World Tour, if not more, than anybody else, including the Australian Institute of Sport.
Yeah, I mean, he's the legacy that he's unfortunately this is the last year for the men's Bridge Lane team, but they are going to have a women's team next year, which is awesome. But it's just, I don't know what the formula is to turning people professional, but he's certainly got it, and I think that's the thing, is he'd still be friends with every one of his riders that, even if they're not turned professional, still have a good relationship with everyone. He's just an unsung hero of Aussie cycling.
It's a really long list, but a couple of key highlights from that team. I was having a conversation with Jack Haig about the number of Aussies that have made it onto the podium in a Grand Tour, and it's a pretty small list. Top three in the general classification. You're obviously one of them. Cadel Evans, Jai Hindley, Jack Haig, and Ben O'Connor. Three of them, you, Jack, and Ben, have gone through the system with Andrew Christie Johnson. That's a hell of a strike rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's the thing is probably, all of us, us five guys that have made it to the podium probably didn't fit into the, the institute mold where it's more, from a track background. I'm not having a go at the institutes here for 1 second, but, it's almost like most of us would have slipped through the cracks, I suppose, so to speak, especially us bridge lane guys. And I mean, for me, I came to the sport quite old in terms of, what age guys or people are turning professional now. And Andrew was there with a bike, with the plane tickets and the budget to get us to races. And that was, that was all I needed, was to get to races and show my face.
What are your memories of some of those earlier races that you did? And what year are we talking? 2007? Did you start with Andrew?
Yeah, so I sort of started 2006. I remember racing a local club race here in Tasmania called Longford to Campbelltown, and Andrew saw that I had a little bit of potential. And then the next week I was off to Tour of Canberra, which Tour of Canberra used to, probably like Tour of Tasmania. It was, it's got that history and it was such a hard race. I just remember finishing stone motherless, dead last every day. And thinking that perhaps I'd made the wrong decision in changing to road cycling.
So when you were finishing last in the Tour of Canberra, it was a really tough race, the Tour of Canberra. It had been for a long time. Did you have aspirations of making it to the World Tour?
I mean, of course, that was a bit of an eye opener. I mean, there were guys there like Stewie Shaw and Rob McLaughlin, Peter McDonald, to name a few, and they were class, seriously class bike riders and tough athletes. So, of course, the dream was always, I used to sit up and watch the Tour de France with my mum while she was up ironing clothing and say, I said to my mum one day, it was like, that's what I want to do. I want to make it to there, which, then going into a race like that, or Mersey Valley Tour, which was not long after the Tour of Canberra, and copping an absolute kicking, it was a little bit of maybe I was a little bit delusional in the beginning.
At what point did you start winning and then start to realise maybe this is a reality? It's not just a pipe dream.
Yeah, I mean, I went on to Tour of Bright. If you listen to some of the stuff that Luke Plapp says, Luke Plapp says a lot of things, but that's the most underrated, most important race in Australia, according to Plappy. So I went there, and that's sort of when I realised that I could climb, I could time trial, and that if I took it a little bit more seriously, because in the beginning my diet was absolutely an absolute nightmare, and so I kind of took it a little bit more seriously and realised that I did have a little bit of potential.
You mentioned your diet. You did have a reputation for loving Toblerone.
Yeah. So I did enjoy it, but probably because you couldn't get Cadbury Dairy Milk over in Europe so easily. But I definitely did I don't eat Toblerone anymore because I had a crash and, I was just inundated with kilograms of Toblerone, and it kind of cured me.
So you managed to win the Tour of Tassie in 2008, and that wasn't long after you really started taking the sport seriously. Did you look back through the honour roll in that race at the time? It was a really significant race in the career of Cadel Evans. It was also a pretty significant race for Luke Roberts, who went on to win Olympic Games gold medal in Athens on the track. For guys after you, Jack Haig, it was a big stepping stone, Cameron Meyer as well. Did you recognise the importance of it at the time?
Yeah, look, I mean, being from Tasmania, of course, I grew up with it, and you'd always hear the older cyclists, the generations before me, talking about the Tour of Tasmania. But even at that time, Cadel Evans was pretty obvious that he would be, the first Aussie to really go for victory at the Tour. And of course, I knew the story that Cadel won on the top of Mount Wellington. And just that honour roll of some of the guys that had won that race, and they were Tasmanian legends, and Aussie cycling legends too. But I mean, that race, and thankfully it's going to be a part of the Pro Velo. The terrain down here in Tassie is probably the most like Europe, with the hills and the weather as well. Kind of reminds you of Paris-Nice sort of early season. But, it's always going to be a good, honest rider who can, challenge in Europe.
So I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark here. If you cannot win this series overall, but you can win one race, the one to win is the Tour of Tasmania in your books.
Yeah, but I think, yes, also, it's pretty awesome to see that, Tour Down Under, or Stuart O'Grady have gotten behind it too. And to be racing in Adelaide in January, that's pretty awesome. And that's really great to see. That's going to be, I remember at the time, that I first did Tour Down Under in 2008, and Matthew Heyman, came over to me in the food hall and after the race and said, you went on the attack, you finished in the top 10 of a World Tour race. Each and every one of these directors at this race would know your name now, and I hope that's what happens in January for these young riders.
I've got no doubt there's going to be more than the Green Edge team. They're going to be looking at the results of these races and keeping their eye on not necessarily the person that wins it, because sometimes there can be somebody that slips through that finishes 4th or 5th or might be 10th overall in the standings, but they've got a bit of a backstory and they've still got plenty of margin for growth. So it's going to be a series, I reckon, Richie, where there's going to be plenty of teams watching closely.
Yeah, look, Matt, there's no problem with the amount of talent we have here in Australia. I mean, I remember coming back from World Tour and racing some of the young guys in the Tour Down Under during the COVID years, and a lot of those guys had the potential to be on World Tour teams. It's just that they weren't in Europe. Let's not beat around the bush. It's much harder to turn professional from Australia or New Zealand. To pack up your life at such a young age and move overseas and make a go of it. So I just think it's fantastic that, somebody's come up with this Pro Velo, and I just hope that, that the young riders make the most of the opportunities they get.
That period that you spoke about when it was COVID and it wasn't the international Tour Down Under, it was essentially a domestic race. And famously on the stage up Wollonga, which you won, of course. Your then teammate Luke Plapp, he was second on that stage behind you. He rode across to you. What was your response after going across the finish line? And I know that your phone got pretty busy in the next hour or so after that stage.
Yeah, I mean, going into the race, I'd heard about Plappy. Plappy's a Tasmanian boy originally too, so there's always a bit of interest there, and obviously I saw that he had a huge amount of talent. He was always up for an attack. He's upbeat and positive. And then on that Wollonga stage when I attacked, I mean, I wasn't in top shape, but I wasn't a million miles away either. And just the ease that he closed that gap. And then, we came to the finish. And there was never a moment that he was going to take the stage off me. He said that to me, and he could have quite easily done that. But, at the time, I was straight on the phone to Tim Kerrison from Ineos and, to try and, get them interested. And it turned out that there was already a lot of interest in him. It wasn't a secret that a lot of the World Tour teams knew what they were dealing with. And, Plappy was a fantastic teammate. And, it was so fantastic to see him in Paris-Nice early this year and performing to the level that he can.
You mentioned the teammate word a couple of times there, and you were teammates with him. That I thought that he might have been able to get the better of you to win that stage, but he didn't challenge at all. There was a lot of respect there from Luke to you. For most athletes, once they get to the World Tour, they're not going to be able to be that winner. So how do you add value to a team? How do you make yourself almost indispensable without troubling the result sheet?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Cycling is such a team sport. But at the end of the day, one person gets the glory. But I've certainly been a part of, teams where, like Team Sky, where we had Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome and, the strongest riders in the world. but they couldn't have won without us. Like they were the strongest, but you do need your team to do that job for you. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is like that kind of gets lost. It's all about winning or being the best, but you need those people like Luke Rose or who are make a great career out of helping others to win.
Don't worry, mate. Roomie and Froomie was trending on social media in Australia, and obviously you were the roomie. Take us back to the transition though, from going from winning the Tour of Tassie 2008 to then you spent a season in Italy as an amateur.
Yeah, so I had 3 years as an amateur in Italy, and I went from taking an absolute drubbing over, in these NRS races against like the Drapac Porsche team, who at the time were an incredible unit, and to then going to Italy and winning my first race, which was, 4-kilometer hilltop finish, probably a little bit heavier than what I am now, but I don't think they realised that if they let me go at the bottom of the climb, they wouldn't catch me. And that was the thing, is I couldn't win a race in the NRS, but I could go to Europe and win. It was a different style of racing, yes, but the level here back then was just that incredibly high that you could go and win under 26 races in Italy straight off the plane.
You can see the depth of the peloton. Like and I spoke about this during the commentary at the National Championships earlier on in 2024, in that there is great depth within Australian cycling, but there's been a real weakness in the racing for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Whereas the National Road Series, when you were racing, it was really strong as a series. And hopefully this gets it back to that position where you finish the season here at the end of March and you're primed and ready to go if you make the trip across to Europe.
Yeah, look, I think, back when I started, we had, John Craven did a fantastic job. Like there was the Tattersalls Cups and things like that. And, I was laughing with Mitch Docker the other day. I don't know how true this is, but I remember that John always had a crew with him, setting up the race finishes and starts. And the story was that, they would do come away to Tour of Tassie or whatever, and he'd put their accommodation and beers on, and they'd put a fantastic race on. And I think, that was sort of 20 years ago. You can't do that now. It's not how things are done, but it was incredible, and the series that they could put on was good.
It was an incredible series. The Tats Cup series was fantastic. That started way back in 1996. I actually managed to ride that one, Richie, and I finished equal fifth in the series with Matt Wilson, who's created this series. So I've got fond memories of the Tattersalls Cup. But to you, and then going across and getting a contract with Saxo Bank, which was the powerhouse team at the time. And tell us how you got the nickname Fish.
Yeah, so that was my first Saxo Bank training camp. Was, we were swimming underwater and in a 50-meter swimming pool, and I was watching the Euros. I think Jens Voigt got like one lap, which was 50 meters, and came up, almost needed to be resuscitated. But then I was like, well, that's kind of that was my bread and butter, was swimming. And obviously, as a young swimmer, you did swim underwater. So I think I managed 72 meters. So that was almost a lap and a half of a 50-meter. And when I came out of the pool, I remember that Björn Ries and Fabian Cancellara pulled me out. And obviously Fabian at the time was the biggest classics rider. And he, called me Fishman. He's like, the fish. and that kind of stuck. But, it's like, it's when you look back at your first pro contract and, the way I had to go about getting that and doing some hard yards. I mean, that was just one of the most incredible memories in my life was your first pro contract. It was pretty awesome, even to this day.
And I think a big step towards that first contract actually went a couple of years earlier on in the Sun Tour of 2008, when you were with the Praties team, as it was known then, now Bridge Lane, and nobody was prepared to take on Saxo Bank, or CSC Saxo Bank as it was then. But you did, because of the instructions of Andrew Christie Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, it was such an incredible thing that you'd watch, people like Stuart O'Grady, who was an idol, probably still is, now that I've got to know Stewie well, and he's a great man. But then to be riding in the peloton on the back, behind those guys on on the Cervelo bikes, which was so iconic at the time, and that kit, it did psych you out a little bit, just to see these guys that were so battle hardened. But then that was it. That was your opportunity at the time. It wasn't easy to ride Tour Down Under if you weren't in the AIS team. So that was sort of my big opportunity to try and stick it to the big guns. And at the end of the day, by doing that, that's where Bradley McGee and Stuart O'Grady saw me race. And that was kind of part of the reason I turned professional, was that Bjorn Rees asked those guys what they thought of me as a rider. And they said, yeah, he's good. You should give him a chance. It's just that little opportunity that all of us need along the way.
I thought it was the courage to take the race on. And incidentally, if nobody's seen the result sheet from that year's race, Stuart O'Grady won overall. Chris Froome was 4th, riding for Barlow World, and 6 seconds behind Chris Froome was Richie. So it was a pretty cool top 5, that edition of the Sun Tour. So one of the things that I often, if I'm asked from a young rider that is getting a chance, whether it be the Tour Down Under or racing overseas, is work out a way where they can stand out and have an impact on the race. And that can be for some riders. And David McKenzie was a perfect example of this when he raced, was getting in breakaways. If you can't win a sprint and you're not a man for the mountains, you got to get in breakaways.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? Is, for us Aussies, making that trip over to Europe, I mean, you're not there just to make up the numbers. And that's it, isn't it? It's like just getting your name out there, taking those opportunities with both hands. It's an easy thing to do to go to Europe, and the culture shock, and you're so far from home, and it is tough. But it's like you do need to sort of just crack on and do what you're there for, and it's obviously. Try and make your family proud was sort of one of those things that for me is like, that was always a thing, if doing it for those that supported you at home.
You certainly managed to achieve that. It's one of the things that you've been famous for in your career, and everybody that was part of that Sky team, was the training camps that you used to do at Tenerife at altitude.
Yeah.
And they didn't sound like a lot of fun, Richie.
No, I mean, the training camps, to be quite honest, were, you go up to Tenerife, there was no working Wi-Fi, or, it was pretty basic. But I remember at the time I was rooming with Bradley Wiggins, and he had the DVD collection to end all DVDs, so we'd just sit there kind of watching DVDs and, massage, physio, and sleep and eat. And that was, it wasn't nice at the time, but we trained so hard, and that's probably why Sky, in the early years, there was nobody else doing that kind of training. That was the whole tour team, and I must admit that it was probably more stressful being on those camps than in the actual race, because you were doing such big hard efforts and long days that it almost did make it feel easier to go and race.
Michael Jordan was renowned for saying that actually trained harder than a lot of his games were. Was that the case with the training camps for Team Sky?
It certainly was. It was, we were training in the heat, the altitude. It was a small crew of us up there, but once you'd gone into battle in training, it was you literally, the races just didn't feel that hard, and I think just the amount of talent that we had in that team, it was a pretty incredible thing to be part of.
And in that team, you played a role in the Grand Tours, at least as a support role. You had the leadership role, winning Paris-Nice, which you won a couple of times, Tour de Suisse, Romandie, Dauphiné, the most successful Australian one-week cyclist of all time. But then going from being the number 2 guy, the super domestique, to being the team leader, which you did at BMC and then Trek. What's the difference between being plan B and plan A?
I mean, it's always easier. Something that I probably could have, managed better was the stress. I was always probably one of the most stressed out riders. I think, most GC guys are, because it's, there's never a moment, you might watch the tour and think that everything looks, peaceful and calm, but there is never a moment in the race when, you can't switch off. You go into a sprint stage, think it's going to be an easier day, and then the next thing, it's got a little bit of crosswind, or everyone's worried about crosswind. So then, obviously when you've gone from super domestique, where your job is just to get to the bottom of the last climb, and that's kind of, you've got a finish line before the finish, to then going and having to perform. It was two totally different things, and it's like you talk to people now and they've got a different opinion of you because you were stressed, and then it's like, well, some of the questions that they asked at the time were a bit, that's you don't realize how stressful that is, riding GC day in day out. It's a 3 week thing, but at the end of it, it was just probably the most stressful time of my life was going for GC in the Tour or the Giro or whatever. It was that's when you have a lot more respect for the Chris Froomes or the Tadej Pogacars and these guys that can go and not listen to the noise around the bubble, which is the Tour de France, and perform.
Win that Tour in 2020, when you did finish in third position, and you had one guy that I thought was the best teammate of the Tour de France that year, Mads Pedersen.
Yeah.
How important was Mads, both on the bike and off the bike?
Look, I mean, Mads was like a psychiatrist off the bike. I mean, I remember one night there was the next day was a stressful crosswind stage. And then, of course, you're reading in the media these crosswinds that are going to happen. And Mads, I remember, knocked on my door and came into my room, and he said, "Right, little fella, this is how it's going to be. Tomorrow you're with Tom Scoynes and me, and you're just going to, drift along behind us." And he said that to me. He said, "There's nobody better in this situation than, the guys we've got around you." And I just remember that day, it was sketchy. It was so dangerous. But then, with 3 kilometers to go, Matt says to me, "Do you mind if I go for the sprint?" Which he did, and ended up second. So, he just did this massive job of protecting me all day, and then just ran second. And it was just, it was just fantastic. And Mads, you don't get teammates like that, loyalty. I remember doing the Tour Down Under that year in 2020, and he was just fantastic there. He was the world champion, and he was just bending over backwards to help me to win the race. And then we were having ice cream that night, or gelato down there, and he says to me, he goes, "This is what we're going to do in the Tour." And that was, before COVID hit, that was just such an awesome thing to have a bloke like that was world champion but prepared to go to the Tour and be all in for me.
Oh, it's amazing to have the reigning world champion laying it all on the line for you. That's extraordinary. One of the things that you've got in common with Simon Gerrans, Robbie McEwen, yourself, 3 of the most successful Australian cyclists of all time, you didn't make it to the pro peloton until you were 24. Tadej Pogacar and Remco Evenepoel, they've spoiled it for the next generation, because there's this expectation that you've got to be there by the time you're 20 and winning big races by the time you're 20. What's your advice to the riders that don't win this series, that aren't quite there at 2021?
Yeah, and that was the thing, wasn't it? It wasn't that long ago that they thought you couldn't win a Grand Tour until you're in your late 20s. So, these things, these like, I wouldn't say it's a fad, but, winning from such an early age, and, what these young guys are doing so early, the workload and stuff. I don't know, it's like, we probably wouldn't have even had a chance to turn professional, but I don't think you should ever give up. I think there's enough teams out there that, and common sense people within these teams that realize that, some people do just mature a little bit later. I was certainly one of those people that matured a little bit later. And I think if you're not professional by the time you're 22, I wouldn't give up, keep following that dream. And I think people know within themselves if they've got the talent or the potential to make a career out of it,
If you were giving a 21-year-old Richie Porte advice now, with the current structure that there is within Australian cycling and the opportunities that there are overseas, how would you advise that young Richie Porte, give a recommendation of how to structure your season?
Well, it's pretty simple, isn't it? I was up in Noosa recently, and I was having a chat with Matt Wilson about this, the new Pro Velo, and it's like, I'm just so rapt that somebody, or there's people that are going to give, young Aussie cyclists this opportunity, and I'd have loved to have, had something like a contract with a fantastic team like Jayco Alula on the line. I think that's, obviously that'd be your first and foremost trying to win that series and get that contract. But, I think that's the thing is people do look down the line, after the first, second or third, people do, see value in a teammate that puts it all on the line to help somebody win. So, it's if you can't win, I think being a good team player is a massive, that's a part of it, of the package of being a complete bike rider too.
And what about the advice for the person that does win it? Because there's going to be one male, one female. They win this series, which concludes at the end of March. The Stagiaire stint doesn't happen until the back end of the season. There's a fair few months to fill with racing and training. What's your advice to them?
I mean, if you can win here in Australia, you can win anywhere. It's I don't think we should ever think of us Australians as inferior cyclists to the Europeans, because we're not. It's like, I think the whole fact that you're prepared to pack your life up and move over there chasing that dream, I think that's a massive head start when you get to the start of a race. And I just think it's such a massive opportunity. And once again, Jerry Ryan's just going above and beyond to help young Aussie cyclists and give them an opportunity.
Oh, Richie, thanks for giving us your time. It's been great to pick your brain on the journey through to the World Tour. And of course, you're going to be paying really close attention to the Tour of Tasmania.
Thank you, Matt. Good luck, everybody.